Good day to everyone, and most especially to Ma'am Lovely Pateti, a bio instructor. I, Jolito B. Lemindog, from Bachelor of Secondary Education, major in Science 2B. In this video, I'd like to give and explain my understanding about this illustration, which is all about the Gametophyte and Sporophyte cycle of plants, included and highlighted the process of mitosis and meiosis in plants. But before we proceed to the discussion, let us first acquainted with the definition of Gametophyte and Sporophyte. What is Gametophyte? Gametophyte is the haploid phase of plants. It produces gametes and zygotes from which the sporophyte arises. The gametophyte produces male and female gametes directly from its plant body. Also, gametophyte represents the sexual phase. In a simple definition, a gametophyte is haploid and is produced by meiosis. On the other hand, what is sporophyte? Sporophyte is the of plants. It produces spores that are developed into the gametophyte. It is dominant in pteridophytes, gymnosperms, and angiosperms. Sporophyte represent the sexual phase of the plant life cycle. In simple words, the sporophyte is diploid and was produced by mitosis. So why gametophyte and sporophyte called as alternation of generations? In algae, fungi, and plants, alternation of generations is common. It is not always easy to observe, however, since one or the other of the generations is often very small, even microscopic. The sexual phase called the gametophyte generation produces gametes or sex cells, and the asexual phase or sporophyte generation produces spores asexually. In terms of chromosomes, the gametophyte is haploid, or has a single set of chromosomes. And the sporophyte, on the other hand, is diploid. It means that it has a double set of chromosomes. So before we go to the next discussion, let us first discuss the reproduction or sexual reproduction of the angiosperm life cycle. The vast array of angiosperm floral structures is for sexual reproduction. The angiosperm life cycle consists of a sporophyte phase and gametophyte phase. The cells of a sporophyte body have full of complement, or it is chromosomes, or it is called as diploid or 2N. The sporophyte is the typical plant body that we see when we look at an angiosperm. The gametophyte arises when cells of the sporophyte in a preparation for reproduction undergo meiotic division or it produces reproductive cells that have only half of a number of chromosomes, or it is called as a haploid or one end. A two-celled microgametophyte called a pollen grain germinates into pollen tube, and through division it produces the haploid sperm. In all plants, the sporophyte produces haploid spores by meiosis. The spores developed into gametophytes, which produce gametes or sperm and egg by mitotic division. The male gametophyte is the sperm-bearing pollen grains, and the female gametophyte is the egg-bearing embryo sacs. When the pollen grain lands on the stigma of the same species, it germinates, growing a pollen tube that extends down into the stigma towards the ovule. Sperm unites with the egg, forming an embryo. Interestingly, an additional sperm unites with two polar bodies. Now let's go to the discussion of this illustration. In first stage, sporophyte generation controls all the vascular plant's life cycles. All plants have a cycle in which they undergo alteration of generations. This process involves haploid multicellular generation, called a gametophyte, and diploid multicellular generation, called the sporophytes. Haploid means having only one set of chromosomes, written as N, and diploid means having two sets of chromosomes, written as 2N. In the second stage of the angiosperm life cycle, the generation of haploid microspores occur inside the anther. Microsporangia and male gametophytes are divided by meiosis. This return undergoes mitosis and pollen grains rise. Microsporangia are sporangia that produce microspores that give rise to male gametophytes at the time of germination. Among both cells, one is the generative cell divided into two sperm parts, and after that, the second cell generates with the pollen tube cells. Megasporangium is present inside the ovule, sheltered within the ovary of the carpel, and it is protected by two layers of integuments and the ovary wall. And every megasporangium, a megaspore undergoes meiosis, which generates 4 megaspores. The meiosis process occurs in the megasporangium, generating one large megaspore and 3 small megaspores. Meiosis is the process where a single cell divides into to produce 4 cells. In all these megaspores, the large one survives, and it produces the female gametophyte, which changes into embryo sac. The megaspore divides 3 times to form an 8 cells. In all these megaspores, the large one survives, and it produces the female gametophyte, which changes into an embryo sac. The megaspore divides 3 times to form an 8 cell. And the third stage and final stage. The migration process of the cell starts in the final stage of the angiosperm life cycle. Out of the 8 cells, 4 cells shift towards embryo sac pole, and the 2 move the equator and ultimately fuse to form 2N polar nucleus. A grown-up embryo sac has a single egg cell and a couple of helping cells known as synergids. Only the mature embryo sac has a single egg cell and 2 synergids, or it is a helper cells. The 3 antipodal cells and 2 polar nuclei cells in a central cell. Once the pollen grain reaches the stigma, a pollen tube extends from a grain and enters via the micropyle, an opening to the ovules and teguments inside the embryo sac. The 2 sperm cells are deposited, and thus the process of double fertilization starts after the deposition of sperm cells takes place in the embryo sac. The future embryo is formed by the combination of an egg and sperm. The endosperm is formed when the second sperm combines with the 2N polar nuclei. The endosperm is a tissue that acts as food reserve. Now, let us review our understanding about the discussion, which is all about the gametophyte and sporophyte in a plant cycle. So, gametophyte and sporophyte are the 2 phases that occur during the alteration of generations in plants and algae. The gametophyte is considered as the sexual phase, and sporophyte is the asexual phase. And the 2 gametophyte is developed by the germination of haploid spores, hence it is also haploid. The sporophyte is developed from the diploid zygote that is formed during the fertilization of gametes. The gametophyte produces gametes while the sporophyte produces spores. During evolution, the sporophyte becomes dominant over the gametophyte. The sporophyte of higher plants is differentiated in root, stem, and leaves as well. However, the main difference between gametophyte and sporophyte is in the number, or in the number of chromosomes sets or diploidy of the plant body in each phase. So the prime difference or the prime distinction between sporophyte and gametophyte is the number or the sets of chromosomes. That's all, and thank you so much, ma'am, and I hope you like this video. Thank you.